I think it's best if we just get this out of the way and have a laugh at the name of Fanny Price, because it's a funny name primarily. Uh, it's just really funny to say Fanny Price. I'm sorry. We'll try to be serious. We're gonna be serious. This is a serious video about a serious topic, and by serious topic I mean we are talking about Mansfield Park. Hello, I am Steven. This is Reading with Steven. And specifically, this is our next episode of Bookshelf A to Z, a project where I read all of the books that I own from A to Z by author's last name. And we are currently on Mansfield Park, Jane Austen's third published novel, and the only one which was kind of a flop in her life. She lost money on the publishing. Back then, you had to pay the publisher to publish your books, and she actually lost money on this. So, even authors like Jane Austen, they can't win them all. But the main character of Mansfield Park is named Fanny Price, which is an absolutely hilarious name. Made even more funny by the fact that she's probably the most prudish of all of Austen's characters. So not only do you have a funny name, but you have an ironically funny name. So before we begin, we have to go over the plot of the novel, because as always, it is impossible to talk about books in an intelligent manner if one doesn't know the plot. And while the best way to understand the plot would be to, read the book, I don't think that's a reasonable request for most people, because let's be honest, nobody's reading anymore. I've seen the statistics. While we should be reading, I know that you don't. So I think it's important that we go over the plot of the novel. If you're worried about the spoilers for a book that is, let's see, that was printed, I think that was published in 1816. So we're talking 209 years. If you're worried about that, I don't know what to tell you there. I get over it, I guess. The plot is probably the least important aspect of any novel anyway. So, it's not the point of this channel is to talk about the plot. But we do need to go over the plot, so that way you guys aren't lost. Or if you've read the book before, you need to remember, stuff like that. Either way, here's the plot. If you're worried about spoilers, I guess you can skip ahead. Do with that what you will. Fanny Price is the indigent niece of Sir Thomas and Lady Bertram, and is taken in by them as an act of charity towards their poorer relations. She is raised by them with their own children, Charles, Edmund, Maria, and Julia, who are all, with the exception of Edmund, very poorly behaved people. Several years go by, and Sir Thomas is forced to leave the country in order to attend business at his sugar plantations in the Caribbean, leaving his children to live without any sort of moral compass, as Lady Bertram is too foolish to even note what her children do on a day-to-day basis. At the same time as Sir Thomas leaves, Mr. and Miss Crawford arrive in the neighborhood of Mansfield Park on a visit to their half-sister, the wife of the rector of Mansfield Park. These two are decidedly bad people, as they have been raised in a broken home. They have no moral compunctions at all, except that they should be rich and entertained. While Sir Thomas is absent, his sons have their way with their father's estate and decide to put on a scandalous theater production. The only people to object to the production are Fanny and her cousin Edmund, but Edmund, who is in love with Mary Crawford, soon relents, leaving Fanny as the only decent person at Mansfield. When Sir Thomas returns, the play is broken up and everybody is reprimanded for their part in it. Maria Bertram then gets married to a man that is very rich, but whom she does not love, and she and Julia go to live in London together. Mr. Crawford, now bored without his play, decides to flirt with Fanny for the entertainment of it, but in the process, accidentally falls in love with her. Fanny hates Mr. Crawford for all he's worth, however. When Mr. Crawford proposes marriage to Fanny, she declines, which upsets Sir Thomas and Edmund, who don't understand why a poor girl with no prospects would ever decline a proposal to such a wealthy man as Mr. Crawford. In order to teach Fanny a lesson, Sir Thomas sends her on an extended visit back to her biological parents, whom she hasn't seen in nearly 10 years. Fanny hates her parents' house and her parents, taking Sir Thomas's point to heart, and is on the verge of accepting Mr. Crawford's proposal when a scandal emerges. Maria Bertram, now married, as previously noted, has run away with Mr. Crawford, causing Sir Thomas to realize that Fanny was right about Mr. Crawford's character. Edmund now sees how wrong he also was about Mary Crawford, who doesn't seem to care about her brother and Maria running away together so much as she cares about it having become public. Edmund therefore stops pursuing Mary Crawford as a wife and instead realizes that the person he's loved all this time was Fanny. They then get married, and thus ends the book. We talked about in Pride and Prejudice how Mr. Bennet is not a very good father, and I'm not going to reread the whole section detailing why he's a bad father, but in short, he is simply he's not very thoughtful towards his daughter's economic future. He doesn't make sure that they're properly educated, and he doesn't even teach them the moral compunctions which are necessary for them to gain. Right? He openly makes fun of their mother. He laughs at them. Um, he's not a bad father. He's not an abusive father, but he seems to abnegate his paternal duties towards them, I guess I should say. And because of this, in Pride and Prejudice, Lydia Bennet runs away because she doesn't know any better. And it seems almost miraculous that the rest of his daughters actually turn out fairly well, Jane and Elizabeth being particularly intelligent and thoughtful people. But Jane Austen, when thinking about Pride and Prejudice, calls it this overly bright and sparkling novel. And to that effect, I think she saw that kind of parental abnegation of duty would not normally work out that well. It wouldn't work out well for the children. And to that point, I think in Mansfield Park, she tries to take a more realistic approach to what that would look like. What kind of children would you end up with if the parents were bad? And not necessarily bad per se, but again, neglectful of their own duties. What kind of children would you end up getting? Because you really wouldn't get an Elizabeth Bennet. You wouldn't get a Jane Bennet. You wouldn't even get a Mary Bennet. You would end up with a Maria and Julia Bertram. Two children, or worse, actually, a Mary Crawford and a Mr. Crawford. What goes wrong? What is the bad parenting in Mansfield Park, I think, is the question that we have to ask ourselves. And why does Fanny Price, why does Fanny grow up to be a good person, but her cousins don't? So I think that looking at the parental figures they have in common first, we see Sir Thomas Bertram. Sir Thomas Bertram is really not like Mr. Bennet in any way. He does, in fact, go out of his way to make sure that his daughters and sons, and even Fanny, are well treated. He makes sure that they are highly educated. He makes sure that they are, given moral instruction. Where he fails, however, is that he does not make sure that those lessons have been internalized. He only cares about the external presentation of those values. In his own words, he feared that active principle had been wanting, that they had never been properly taught to govern their inclinations and tempers by that sense of duty which can alone suffice. They had been instructed theoretically in their religion, but never required to bring it into daily practice. To be distinguished for elegance and accomplishments, the authorized object of their youth, could have had no useful influence that way, no moral effect on the mind. He had meant them to be good, but his cares had been directed to the understanding and manners, not the disposition. And of the necessity of self-denial and humility, he feared they had never heard from any lips that could profit them. So that is the main moral failing of the Bertram children, that they knew how to outwardly act, and indeed of the Crawfords as well, although they are a whole different can of worms. But the Bertram children had been taught how to act and how to look like they were good people, but never how to actually be good people. This is, of course, because Sir Thomas is the only moral foundation for them. He tries to do his duty to his children, but never seems to treat them as people who need to be loved and nurtured in such way. He treats them almost as though he were a schoolmaster, giving them lessons, and less as a father. On the other side of the spectrum, of course, is Lady Bertram. Now, Lady Bertram also treats Fanny just as well as she treats her children, which is to say that she doesn't really treat them at all. Lady Bertram is so useless, I guess, as a parent, that she doesn't even seem to know what's happening around her. She only cares about herself. She only cares about her own leisure, and she never gives any thought at all to what her children are doing, which again is at least equally how she treats Fanny, but again, it's not well. She seems to throw off the maternal mantle that is hers in the as almost as the very opposite of, say, a Marmee from Little Women. Marmee takes it upon herself to teach the moral and to love the children. Lady Bertram does neither. The other maternal figure for the children is, of course, Aunt Norris. Aunt Norris loves Maria and Julia Bertram. She does everything they could want. Everything that Aunt Norris does is for their benefit. She loves them. She treats them well. She calls them beautiful. She calls them intelligent. She, however, does not love Fanny. At several points, she is openly mean to Fanny. She treats Fanny as though Fanny were a servant. She revels in denying Fanny certain, even basic necessities, just for the sole pleasure of saving Sir Thomas money that Sir Thomas is more than happy to spend on Fanny. In Fanny Price's own sitting room, Aunt Norris for years has denied Fanny the ability to have a fire, even in the middle of winter. So Fanny's always up there freezing to death. And when Sir Thomas finds out, this is ridiculous. Of course you have to have a fire. And from that point onwards, Fanny is allowed a fire. But before that, Aunt Norris had been openly trying to deny her. In the section on the drama, all of the children are trying to attempt to get Fanny to play a role. Fanny, knowing that it's wrong to put on this play, knowing that Sir Thomas would not want to have this play put on, declines and says that she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't feel up to doing it. She doesn't wish to do it. She doesn't believe that it is morally right to do. Aunt Norris, who should ostensibly know better, and whom Sir Thomas depends on knowing better while he is away, takes the children's side. And not just takes the children's side, but does so in a horrendous manner, calling Fanny a very obstinate, ungrateful girl if she does not do what her aunt and cousins wish her. Very ungrateful indeed, considering who and what she is. This kind of a pointed remark infuriates Edmund to the point that he can't even speak, right? Because it's wrong to call your aunt a nasty woman. But even Mary Crawford, somebody who is throughout the novel not a particularly moral person, even Mary Crawford is like, whoa, that's way too far. And she goes out of her way to comfort Fanny, despite Fanny not doing what Mary wants her to do. Even she recognizes that Aunt Norris has gone way too far in implying, I don't even know if it's really an implication, it's stating outright that Fanny is a lesser person than everybody else in the room. Despite this seeming lack of parental influence, Fanny does end up a decent person, however. We know that she ends up a decent person. She is the moral stick in the mud, if you will, throughout the novel. But we know how her. But what one begins to wonder if the reason for this is potentially Aunt Norris's being mean to her, which is implied that being abused by Aunt Norris has helped Fanny, although I don't know if that's really true. I think it's just made Fanny a more shy person rather than a more moral person. I think the real difference is um, not Aunt Norris's being mean to her. Rather, it is Edmund. Edmund, who is destined to be a member of the church, a rector. I'm not Anglican. I don't know the words. I should know the words. I'm talking about them. But he's supposed to enter the church and be a vicar or whatever it is they call them. And because of that, he kind of takes on a fatherly role for the much younger Fanny. Even from the time when she first arrives. When she first arrives, she's very scared. She's very shy. She's worried that everything is so grand. And Edmund takes her under her wing, says, "Don't worry. Well, I'll get you used to things. I'll teach you how to write letters so that you can talk to your family, to your brothers and mother and everything like that." And throughout her life, he is always instructing her, giving her books to read, making sure that she is being properly educated. Now, Edmund is the younger son, and therefore has no influence over his sisters or his older brother. But he does have influence over Fanny, and it is this paternalistic education that he gives to Fanny, which I think is the main difference, which is why she ends up doing all right. Now, of course, at the end of the novel, Edmund and Fanny end up married together, which makes this kind of pseudo father-daughter, brother-sister relationship that they have very questionable in our mind now. And to be honest, it is questionable. I don't think you can unquestion it. The vibes are not right with the book. Quote, "With such a regard for her, indeed, as his had long been, a regard founded on the most endearing claims of innocence and helplessness, and completed by every recommendation of growing worth, what could be more natural than the change? Loving, guiding, protecting her as he had been doing ever since her being 10 years old, her mind in so great a degree formed by his care, and her comfort depending on his kindness, an object to him of such close and peculiar interest, dearer by all his own importance that with her than with anyone else at Mansfield, what was there now to add, but that he should learn to prefer soft light eyes to sparkling dark ones? And being always with her, and always talking confidentially, and his feelings exactly in that favorable state which a recent disappointment gives, those soft light eyes could not be very long in obtaining the preeminence." That's a gross quote. Like, I don't think there's any getting around it. That this book has it's got bad vibes to the romance plot. But I do think that it is worth noting that this sort of kind of student-teacher-y morality is common throughout Austen's novels. And one might begin to wonder if that is not something that Austen herself thought was an ideal situation for her romantic partners. I mean, you have Fanny and Edmund in Mansfield Park, of course, but also Edmund and Emma and Mr. Knightley and Emma, Marion Dashwood and Colonel Brandon in Sense and Sensibility, and Catherine Morland and Henry Tilney in Northanger Abbey. However, I don't think that one can necessarily make a too broad of a statement, because of course she does make fun of that very same relationship style of relationship in Pride and Prejudice. You know, Mr. Collins thinks that he's a moral teacher, and he's a buffoon. He's treated as a buffoon by Elizabeth, who is much smarter than him, to be fair. Now, I don't think it would be right to say that Austen is just advocating for some sort of trad wife infantilization of women or anything like that. After all, her heroines are not stupid people. And even Fanny Price, her least intellectually accomplished main character, has her own ideas of what is prudent and what is right. Early in the novel, for example, she vehemently disagrees with the group when it comes to performing the play. And with her sister, Susan, her biological sister, by the end of the novel, she has at least partially overcome that shyness of character that she has suffered through when it comes to Susan, with whom she begins to take on a parental role in much the same way that Edmund had taken with her. All this became gradually evident and gradually placed Susan before her sister as an object of mingled compassion and respect. That her manner was wrong, however, at times very wrong, her measures often ill chosen and ill timed, and her looks and language very often indefensible, Fanny could not cease to feel, but she could hope that they might be rectified. Susan, she found, looked up to her and wished for her good opinion, and knew as anything like an office of authority was to Fanny, knew as it was to imagine herself capable of guiding or informing anyone, she did resolve to give occasional hints to Susan, and endeavor to exercise for her advantage the juster notions of what was due to everybody, and what would be wisest for herself, which her own more favored education had fixed in her. So we can see that Fanny is not stupid. She's not stupid. She's a relatively highly educated person. May not be as educated as, say, Emma Woodhouse or the Dashwoods or anything like that, but she's certainly not stupid. And more to the point, she is, by the end of the novel, coming into her own as a grown woman and taking on that maternal role to the less fortunate. And I think that this is more to the point of what Austen is getting at. It's not that one needs that the best marriages are a student teacher kind of relationship, a father daughter sort of thing. It's that her heroines, in being characters in a novel, have to grow, and the most ideal person for them to learn from is their male leads. Now, while we might think that that is problematic, and it is, I think that it is best just to see it in light of that sort of plotness. Oh God, almost dropped my computer. I think it is more important to see that it is more of a plot necessary thing rather than an idealized version. Because at the end of the day, when all of her characters get married, they are not still that immature, youthful girl. They are all thoughtful, mature women who have grown into the ability to be a decent wife and partner. And so I think it's more important to focus more on that. And I think that the groomingness of it, the ickiness of it, is more of a plot device that we today don't appreciate, but was more commonplace back in the early 19th century. So my cat is rolling along on the bed behind the camera, just basking in the fact that he has a whole bed to himself. You can be on camera briefly. Oh. Yes, how does it feel? You're on camera. Oh, God. You're very heavy. Oh. What do you think? What are your opinions on Fanny Price and what makes a good marriage? Do you think it's weird that she married Edmund? He doesn't care. All right, so Mansfield Park is unique in all of Austen's novels because it is the only book in which we get to see a middle-class lifestyle. And I think that it would be remiss if we didn't talk about that at least a little bit because of how singular it is. And I do mean middle class here. There is I think, some misconceptions towards the wealth of some of Austen's characters. And I talked more about this in Pride and Prejudice when I talked about money. But I think it's really important to note that the Bennets are, for example, are described as being impecunious and the Dashwoods as being very close to poor. And I think it's important to remember that none of that is true. I mean, the Bennets are impecunious, but that's through their own lack of planning, not because they don't have a lot of money. All of these people, all of Austen's characters, uh, are in what would at the time be considered the gentry. Now, the gentry class of people are just under the aristocracy, the titled aristocracy at the top, and then you have the middle class at the bottom, the people who work for a living. And between these people are the gentry, the gentlemen and gentlewomen, people who make their money not through the labor, but through investments and through owning land and by renting out properties and stuff like that. Or also people who would have professions and professional degrees. So in this situation, lawyers, doctors, and theologians, members of the Church of England, if you will, which many of Austen's male characters are in fact, members of the Church of England. For this reason, because it is a profession which allows you, if you don't inherit money, then it allows you to have money, but in a acceptable manner. However, we never see, outside of Mansfield Park, we never see an actual middle class, people who actually work. The closest we get are the gardeners in Pride and Prejudice, who are merchants, but they don't really count because they are so wealthy that they are practically members of the gentry, and they could, in fact, become landowners if they were so inclined to do so, much like the Bingleys had, Mr. Bingley's father had done. That you could switch from being a rich merchant to being in the gentry. So the gardeners really are in that position where at any time they could sell off their merchant business and become gentry. So they don't really count. I don't think they really count. The next other people are the Mr. Martin and Emma, who is a farmer. He plays rents to Mr. Knightley, Mr. Knightley owns the land, but Mr. Martin is who runs the land, who is the farmer, and he is fairly well off. He has a fairly large farming business, but even still, Emma looks down her nose at him completely and rejects his lifestyle completely at the beginning of the novel, much like many of Austen's readers would have done. Back to Mansfield Park, with Fanny Price's visit to her biological parents' home at the end of the novel, we do get a more intimate look at a middle-class lifestyle, and it is a woeful picture. While Mansfield Park, the estate, not the novel, is shown to be a well-ordered, clean, and peaceful place, the Price home in Portsmouth is shown to be small. It is in disarray, it is dirty, and it is very loud. Indeed, Fanny's first impressions of the home are of its smallness and the thinness of its walls, where she can hear everybody yelling, including her mother, her siblings, and everybody just kind of yelling and arguing. In the way that we might see in an American style sitcom. The way people act. That's how Fanny Price sees them, and it is unacceptable. So keep that in mind. But that is merely the superficial stuff compared to the manners of the household, because it is the manners of the household that really offend Fanny. William, her brother, was gone, and the home he had left her in was, Fanny could not conceal it from herself, in almost every respect the very reverse of what she could have wished. It was the abode of noise, disorder, and impropriety, Nobody was in their right place. Nothing was done as it ought to be. She could not respect her parents as she had hoped. On her father, her confidence had not been sanguine, but he was more negligent of his family. His habits were worse and his manners coarser than she had been prepared for. He did not want abilities, but he had no curiosity and no information beyond his profession. He read only the newspaper and the Navy List. He talked only of the dockyard of the harbor, Spithead, and the Mother Bank. He swore and he drank. He was dirty and gross. She had never been able to recall anything approaching to tenderness in his former treatment of herself. There had remained only a general impression of roughness and loudness, and now he scarcely ever noticed her, but to make her the object of a coarse joke. And in regards to her mother, Fanny's nicety is also disappointed, uh, describing her mother as being a partial, ill-judging parent, a dawdle, a slattern, who neither taught nor restrained her children, whose house was the scene of mismanagement and discomfort from beginning to end, and who had no talent, no conversation, no affection towards herself, no curiosity to know her better, no desire for friendship, and no inclination of her company that could lessen her sense of such feelings. This is a damning picture. We can see with Mr. and Mrs. Price where the real class divide exists, according to Fanny, and likely according to Austen as well. It isn't in wealth, after all. The Prices aren't all that materially less wealthy than, say, Aunt Norris or any of the very low gentry throughout Austen's novels. After all, they have their servants and they live in a seeming retirement. They're not actively laboring in order to make their lives. But no, it is not. It is not in the financial sense that they are bad. It is where the divide lies. It is rather in the moral sense, in the intellectual inferiority of her parents, and to really anybody within the gentry. That for Fanny and for Susan as well, that the want of liberality and orderliness is so painful to live with that both sisters' sole wish is to be free from from the confines of the Price home, even going so far as to say that Fanny is willing to accept Mr. Crawford's proposal of marriage just to get away from it. It is that bad that she would rather live the rest of her life with somebody that she doesn't even like just to get away from the middle class attitudes of her parents. Now, the idea of class distinctions will come up again. The idea of class distinctions will come up again in Emma, and we'll talk about them more thoroughly there, because Emma does act as a sort of companion piece to Mansfield Park. And so I think we're going to get a more complete view there, like not just how Fanny views the middle class, but how other members of the gentry do as well, and what that means, I think, for English society as a whole at the time. And so we'll talk about that again more fully with Emma. And so I just wanted to bring it up here because it is the only time we see the middle class really as full people, as full characters. And so I thought we would talk about it. Here we see Fanny, a member of the gentry with the middle class, and in Emma we will see Harriet, a member of the middle class, in Emma's household as a comparison. But I just wanted to bring that up. We'll talk about it more fully with Emma, though. Right, so I think I should admit now that Mansfield Park is not my favorite Austen novel. I think it is overly long. It is overly serious, and I cannot get over the fact that a play that nobody's ever heard of is integral to the plot of this novel. I never really talked about the play because Lover's Vows is a not very good play, so I didn't think it was important to talk about because I didn't think anybody would have read it. And nobody's read it. Nobody's ever read it. It's included, the selections of it, I believe, are included in this version, in this copy. It's not even the full play. I don't think it's the full play. So they have the play in the Norton Critical Edition, if you're so inclined. You probably find it online. But the fact that a play that nobody's ever heard of is integral to the plot, I think, is a real detriment to the novel. Yeah, it was a bad plan. It's a bad plan. And so I think it's hard for a modern audience to really like enjoy Mansfield Park. I think there's moments in it. I liked the seeing the Price is Home and seeing Fanny's response to the Price is Home. I thought that was a very interesting thing. But overall, I think the novel is kind of ho hum, and it is really taken down by just the horrendous vibes. The fact that Edmund is a father figure to Fanny, and they end up getting married, and the fact that the one of the only decent people in the novel, Sir Thomas, is a slave owner. Like, it's hard to get past that. So, of all of Austen's novels, this is probably my least favorite. But it is, I said before, I can't reach it. George, my cat, is sitting on my copy of Emma, but I would show you the copy of Emma I have. It is, I think, works as a companion piece because, again, this is Austen's only real flop within her life. And to that effect, I think that she wrote Emma on seeing the problems with Mansfield Park, seeing how it didn't do well. She wrote a much funnier, much more lively novel with Emma, and Emma did much better financially for her in her life. But I do think that they have a very similar theme of not having good parents. What does not having good parents mean to the child? And while Mansfield Park takes a very negative view, Emma does take a much more. I think it's an equally negative view, but it does it in a much funnier and more interesting manner. It deals with it in a more funny and interesting manner, I should say. And so I like Emma a lot more. But you know, for the next video will be about Emma. I always forget to include this. Please like, subscribe, and comment in the video about what you think about Mansfield Park. I love hearing the comments. I almost never get comments. I love comments. And I appreciate, all the likes and subscriptions and all that jazz. I mean, you know what to do. Every video tells you to do that. So please, please do that to me. Not because it helps the channel, although I'm sure theoretically it would, but mostly because I really like it. It makes me feel good when people do that. So you should do that too. Our next video is going to be about Emma by Jane Austen again. Other than that, I think that I don't know that there's much else to say, so I will leave you here. I'm Steven. This is Reading with Steven, and go out and keep reading.